Hey guys, this is Paul, and this is another episode of Game Dev Paradise. All right, so what's today's topic? Well, today's topic is how to learn programming. So really, like I said in the first episode, what you should be aware of, what you should think about whenever somebody makes a video or tells you something or teaches you or tells you a story or whatever, is that really it's not so much how to learn programming, but how I think somebody should learn programming. And then if you really, when you boil it down to, it almost kind of converts to how I learned programming. Like I said, there's many different ways. There's many different methods. You can get a book. You can go online. You can watch videos. You can go to school. You could have somebody tutor you. You could do a combination of all those, or two of those, or three of those, or there's probably other methods that I didn't mention. I'm not aware of. So there's quite a lot of ways. So really, in a way, this video might be more like this, how I learn, me, the speaker right now, Paul. So if this is helpful to you, great. If not, toss it away, ignore it. If you have any feedback, comments, let me know. And let's get started. So actually, there's another aspect to this. If we get rid of all these little guys, and we could even say, it sort of boils down to this: why I think how programming is taught is wrong. It sounds like a kind of a funny question, funny sentence, but um, this is my personal opinion. But I think a lot of times programming is taught incorrectly. But at the same time, I don't necessarily have a better method, nor am I saying to get rid of the current method. But basically, right now, from my experience, I think programming is taught the wrong way. So when we say taught, well, what do I mean by that? Well, I mean taught in school, or taught via books, or like web tutorials. I think in a lot of ways, programming is taught wrong. But really, it might be more for my own personal way of learning. Programming is taught wrong. It really kind of boils down to it. So keep that in mind as you're listening to this video, as you're considering. Um, these are my preferences. This is my experience. Yours might be different. Yours might be the same, but I think basically this is what this video is actually about. To be perfectly honest, I mean the title is "How to Learn Programming," but it's sort of more this: why I think programming is taught wrong currently, and what to do about it, what to think about it, that sort of stuff. Okay, so to get started, how did I learn programming? That might be a good place to start, just to give you kind of a background, and then to say why I think that was wrong, and then to say what worked for me, or at least how did I get to the point where I've coded up a video game, a 3D video game, Space Sim. So I started learning programming when I was around 7 years old. I was born in Poland, and when I was 7 years old, Poland was a communist country. So what happened was during World War II, Poland basically ceased to exist in a way. The Germans came in from the one side, the Russians came in from the other side. After the war, the Russians stayed. I'm kind of like simplifying things, but basically Poland was a communist country, or at least sort of had a communist government. Whether the people were communists is a little different story. Some were, some weren't. Most of them, I would say, probably weren't. They were just trying to get by. But anyway, strangely enough, I had family, or my dad had family in the United States, and he traveled to the United States. He decided to stay there, and then eventually we moved over there. But between the time when my dad traveled to the United States and then the rest of the family followed, me, my brothers, and my mom, he would send us gifts for Christmas. And my oldest brother, he asked for a computer, so my dad sent over a Commodore 64. What's a Commodore 64? Well, let's Google it. It's the stuff of dreams for little little boys like me. So actually, this whole computer was this keyboard, and you would plug it into a monitor, plug it into a tape drive, plug in like a joystick and things like that, and that was the entire computer. It was super super awesome. Um, and when you turned on the computer, let's see if we can find this in Wikipedia. You got this little prompt, ready. And this is actually kind of bringing back all these kind of curious memories. You got this little prompt. It told you how much RAM it had and this, which meant nothing to me, especially because it was in English. And this again, I was in Poland, so um, it came with video games like these cartridges. You could get more video games via tapes, literal tapes. Wow, some of you guys, yeah, depending how old you are, that might by itself be really weird. But not even floppy disks. Floppy disks for a lot of you might be weird. CDs for some of you and DVDs might be kind of weird that games come on them, because games are all digital now, or a lot of them are. But anyway, these actually, some of these came on tape, some of these came on floppies. We didn't actually have a floppy drive yet. That was another add-on. So anyway, we got this computer. We figured out how to play games, which was a bit of a challenge because everything was in English. But there was this sort of a community of other people with Commodore 64s. There was these magazines and things like that. So even in Poland, communist Poland, you could still kind of figure this out. So then you would type in commands like run some game or whatever. I believe was one of the commands. And then little by little, me and my brothers, we figured out how to play games, and then little by little, we got a little bit more into the community, and you could start typing in simple commands. So in that little prompt that you saw, this guy, you could actually type in something like this: 10 print hello, and when you would hit enter, it would execute and it would like print off hello. So let's actually see if we can find a Commodore 64 emulator, web emulator. Let's see. Um, uh, uh, yeah, this is not really responding. But basically, you would type in sort of like hello. This might be the wrong grammar. It might be like this, or it might be like this. I forget now. And then you would hit enter, and it would give you this output of hello, and you could do like 10 print hello, 20 go to 10, which would create a basic loop, and it would just constantly output this on the screen like forever, on and on and on. So that was like the really, really basic steps of programming. It was really more like copy and pasting, trial and error type of stuff for, 7-year-old me. I mean, it was really just basically fooling around. You know what I mean? Just goofing off. It wasn't really learning programming. But for a 7-year-old, you could kind of say it to sound fancy. Oh, I learned programming when I was 7, blah, blah, blah. Really not true, but let's just get started there. Um, and these programs could get elaborate, and you could actually have something like Pitfall, right? This was like a pretty early Commodore 64 game where these really talented programmers would create Pitfall, Activision, and this was one of the games we played. So, uh, via that sort of coding, talented programmers, like really, really early programmers, the first game makers, before that was Pong probably, but then these guys were soon after, made games. So it was possible to turn these very simple things, a little more advanced ones, into games. Of course, we never got that far, but what would happen is like these sort of hobbyist magazines would be around, and they would give you like a whole list of stuff, and then you could type it in, and you could hit run, and maybe you'd see like a little ghost moving around. So there was a little bit of that. So that was my first encounter with programming, and that was pretty awesome. Let me tell you like that. And then things kind of moved along, um, and in grade school, there'd be a little bit of trial and error, and then my brother started experimenting with C++, I believe, or maybe it was just C at that time. And I would kind of look over his shoulders. He got one of those books called uh, C, let's say C, Learn C in 20, 21 days, I believe. Let's take a look. Learn C in 21 days. Um, Teach yourself. Teach yourself C in 21 days. So my brother got this book, and he was really interested in programming. And me, as sort of hanging on, looking over his shoulder, I was interested in programming too, of course, because of games. Um, and somewhere around high school, I gave this a shot. I gave this Learn C in 21 days. And at first, everything was great, everything was easy. Um, and then problems cropped up. But problems cropped up. So then, and I might be kind of mixing up the exact chronology here, but somewhere around that point in high school, I decided to take a programming class in BASIC. And because of my Commodore 64 experience, I was already a little bit more advanced than everybody else. I had sort of a step up over other people. I kind of understood the basics. And that class went pretty well. But I was always told that programming really, really depended heavily on math. Told this all the time, and actually, I wasn't really good in math. I was kind of average. I really didn't like math for a variety of reasons. But anyway, I was told this all the time. And actually, I had a bit of a problem getting into this programming class because it had a requirement of getting a certain grade or a certain class of math in high school. And I didn't have that requirement, but the teacher like said, fine, you can come in. So already I was being hampered by this. Me, the guy who made a game, 3D game in C++, was being told this. So I guess my point is, if you're being told this, or if you're thinking of this, um, it's not 100% true. How true it is a matter of debate, but programming does not equal you have to be good at math. All right. And math is something that you're not necessarily born with. You can learn this as well. So if you're weak at math or whatever, I'm sure you can learn it, you can become stronger. So if you're looking at that sort of perspective, and if that's kind of hampering you or worrying you, you can use me as a sort of example where somebody not great at math getting somewhere. All right. So that class went pretty well. That basic programming class. Basic that went pretty well. I kind of ran into some problems, but they're not really that important. They're just your usual stuff. Kind of my personality. In terms of, I would basically try to be too ambitious with programs I would do. Kind of like right now with my game Void Destroyer 1 and 2. It's a little too ambitious. But somewhere around this point, I would try to do the teach yourself C in 21 days that my brother already went through, and my brother was pretty good with. And the first week went really easy, went really great. You know, the basic commands made sense, loops, if-then statements, uh, initializing variables. All these things were pretty easy to me. Functions, passing variables, things like that. All these things were easy to me. So, for example, like maybe day 10 was pretty easy, and then I would hit a wall. And this is where I would tend to say is the problem with how programming is taught. So, and again, for me, right, how programming is taught, how my experiences with how programming is taught, I would run into a wall. And what's interesting is I even had a brother to ask, and my brother would try to explain the concept to me, and he did a pretty good job explaining it, but I still had a problem with learning it. So then, somewhere around that point, I went into college, um, UIC in Chicago, University of Illinois at Chicago, I believe. At UIC, I took a probably like intro to C++ course, you know, I believe my second semester. And again, I had a sort of this advantage where I experimented with a Commodore 64. I did basic programming in class in high school. And actually, if we back up a little bit here, I even coded simple video games in high school using a T181 calculator. So if we back up a little bit, T181 was a graphing calculator, and it had quite a lot of memory in it. You could type in using this little tiny keyboard, little tiny screen. You could definitely um, create programs, and this little graphing screen would give you the output. So I had this sort of advantage over potentially other kids, other high schoolers, other people in college, you know. And I couldn't get past day 10 or whatever. And then UIC, I had this advantage here, and I think I got like a D in that class, you know. So somebody who now made a video game is an indie game dev, I got a D in that class. Actually, for a variety of reasons. I was a terrible student back then. I was in love with the internet. Back then, like the internet in college, you could have access to the internet. That's kind of how it worked. And I just fell in love with it. I became obsessed with it and online gaming and things like that. So this D grade was probably mostly this. I probably could have pulled a C or something. And again, I had this sort of advantage over other people, and it just disappeared. Them being better students, or just disappeared, and I hit this wall again. Otherwise, I could have probably gotten a C or a B or something in that class. I really should have. I had all these advantages from being 7 years old, experience with computers, to now. So really, what is this wall I'm talking about? This is really, in my opinion, how programming is taught is wrong. This becomes this sort of effect. That's basically what I'm talking about. That wall is how I think that programming is taught incorrectly. So let's get into the wall and how to overcome it. All right. So we are at the wall, right? What is the wall? So for me, the wall was pointers. Okay. So what's a pointer? I don't want to get too much into it. The pointer is something like this. So usually you have something like integer x is equals to 0. This creates a variable called x. It initializes it to the value of 0. So if we say x is equal to x plus 1, now x is actually going to be 1, right? So this is just some basic really coding, just to kind of highlight something. But then you can have something like int x, right? This little guy makes x into a pointer. What a pointer is it points to an area of memory. And this was a big wall to me, you know, because now these programming books and these teachers were saying like, okay, well, you know, x day 1 int x equals 1, right? And have int y equals 2, and then like, okay class, so what's going to be what's the value of z, you know? So that would be like the programming class or the book, right? And then you would say, well, if x is equal to 0, kind of like this, and y is equal to 2, z is equal to 2, you know? So that was pretty easy. But all of a sudden, the classes, using pointers were something like this. Pointer of type int x, pointer of type int y, and then you would have, and actually I even struggle with this now, something like this, and then you would say, all right, what is z, you know? And then that would basically be, I believe, to z would be the same as y. The same address of y is equal to z. So if I'm losing you, I was pretty lost at that point too. And the problem was, I believe, in my learning of programming, having all this sort of background in it and things like that, is I struggled with, why do you need to use pointers? You know, not so much the how. Um, the why, you know, why would we use pointers, prevented from me understanding the how. So the books and the teachers would explain, you know, why use pointers a little bit, in a pretty crappy way, I think. So the why wasn't well demonstrated, and that, you know, for me, for my personal way of learning, really hurt me understanding the how it works, because really, to me, the how and the why are almost identical. You know, in my mind, I'm sort of this practical, in a sense, I guess, for lack of a better word, in these terms, where the how and the why, this is kind of what my mind kind of looks like. You know, it's they're kind of linked as far as programming goes. So teaching a certain concept in school was a real problem, and just teachers and the books couldn't reach me. You know, whose fault is that? Is it the fault of the teacher? Is it the fault of the book? Is it a fault of mine? Whatever. Who cares? Doesn't matter. It's just, programming was taught wrong for me. I had this issue. So, and the thing is that as I got older, I started working on Void Destroyer 1 and all these hobbies and or whatever the thing that became Void Destroyer 1. And then I took another programming class because I actually wanted to get a degree, have that piece of paper for my career, for various things like that, for my own personal satisfaction. I wanted to take a degree, and I went back to college to finish up, and I was taking another programming class at Roosevelt University of Java. And at this point, I understood pointers. I understood everything pretty much. I was already in the process of making Void Destroyer 1. It was already like spaceships flying around and bullets flying and things like that. So it was decently advanced. I think it was like a year or something after I started with Void Destroyer 1. So this class was easy, and I got an A plus in it or whatever. Class was super easy. But at this point is when I understood that programming was being taught wrong for me. And I understood it because I taught myself programming via all these different tools, via having that background of classes, of experimenting, of coding those games, early games and things like that. So all those things contributed to me learning of C++ and other programming languages. So the way I was taught was wrong, but it still contributed towards the end goal. But I could look back at it, I could analyze, and I could sort of ask myself, hey, why did it not work before where it worked now? And what I realized was, and I'm going to try to explain this, hopefully in a good way. Let me think for a second. What I realized the answer for me was that programming was being taught wrong because these concepts, these higher level concepts like pointers, these I only understood in a more complicated need. All right, so let me try to back up. Let me try to explain this because I think I might be kind of losing you guys. Basically, int x equals 0, int y equals 2, y is equal to y plus x plus y. This is easy to understand, but when you look at this, why would anybody write this kind of software, this program? This makes zero sense to write this, right? For a practical way. Now this is how it's taught. This is how it's taught in books. This is how it's taught in classes. Like, okay, students, what is y here? Well, that's easy, right? Because this is 0, this is 2, and this is 2. So y is equal to 4 here. But this has no practical application, this example. So when we got to pointers and said like, hey, use pointers instead here. Use pointers instead and tell me what y is equal to. This completely like lost me. At this point, just complete loss, complete lack of understandings. In fact, I might even have a problem telling you what this equals now because yeah, I'm just not even going to embarrass myself. I'm not even going to try to like solve this. But this technically is valid code right here. Pretty sure. And I was lost. So programming was being taught wrong for me because the examples were given were not practical. They were these vague and they were like sort of equations and they didn't make any sense, And then when I started working on Void Destroyer, I started working on this app, and I needed different sections of code, and I needed to create projectiles and ships and planets and asteroids and things like that. Then using pointers made absolute sense because not everything was in one spot. So I needed to access the memory in a different spot. So what I'm trying to say is how to learn programming. Um, and to be a little more specific in this particular video, because I can't cover everything, but this video is more focused on this actually. Um, there'll be probably a part two, how to learn programming, which might be a little focused on a different aspect. But I think programming is being taught wrong because, teach yourself in 21 days. Well, it took me much longer than 21 days, personally, and I bet my brother who went through that book, it probably took him longer than 21 days too. You're still learning now new things years later. Um, and a class is a semester usually, so maybe that's like 4 months uh, of a class. Uh, and the examples in that beginner class are going to be these sort of int x equals 0, int y equals 2 type stuff, things that don't really make sense. And then you're being asked like maybe a little more concrete examples of like, hey, there's write a bank software for, or like write a book software for checking in and checking out books. That makes a little bit more sense. When teachers do that, when they give you sort of a practical example. But the problem is, if you're trying to teach somebody programming in 4 months, you got to go through the basics, which takes like a month. Um, then like slightly more second month, and you're sort of running out of time, you know. And if you lose a student here, then the third month, like, students got to catch up. Students kind of lost at this point. So in 4 months and in school, there's not enough time to go through the basics, the intermediate stuff, um, and to explain it for certain students, like a student like me, why it would be used. Because what happens is, like an assignment, a teacher's going to give you an assignment, and it's like, okay, it's due next week. Well, it can't be that big, it can't be that complex. So using pointers or using more advanced concepts and practicing them just doesn't happen, you know. Now, of course, there's going to be like C++ or Java, advanced Java or whatever in school, a little more advanced courses, which might have a little more advanced applications. But basically, I think it's being taught wrong because it's not practical enough. There's too much like int x, int y, uh, vague sort of things, not practical. And I think it's being taught wrong because it's taught in this sort of little snippet, and the code is too small. So how to learn programming, or how I learned programming, was more working on this giant application, too ambitious, too crazy, too crazy for one person, copying and pasting, just like a kid. I would copy and paste code that I would see on the Ogre 3D forums. I'll kind of get into that a little bit later, but that's the rendering engine I used. Um, there was all these things, all these sorts of facts, tutorials. I would bring up these tutorials, and I would literally like copy and paste things. I'd copy this line, see what it does, compile it, read up what the tutorial person was saying. I would copy this. So I had a definite need in my mind, and I could go to this, I could kind of Google and search and find, I could copy and paste. I didn't really understand this too much. Um, even almost the syntax, I didn't understand too much. But little by little, I could trial and error. I could look it up online, and because I had a bit of a background with programming, like I said, um, I was able to know certain things that I could look for, you know. So that background, that school, those books, even though they were wrong, you know, they helped me. There was a foundation. There was something I had in my mind to search for. So, like I said, even though something's wrong, it doesn't mean it should be destroyed, thrown away, or whatever. And it's wrong for me, which is very important. If it works for you, great, perfect. If it's okay for you, great. You know, if it's wrong for you, try something else. But it doesn't necessarily mean you have to destroy it. And sometimes wrong just means not perfect. And that's quite a lot of things in our world, just not perfect. So how I learned programming, you know, I had kind of a lifetime of little experiences, a lot of trial and error, lots of failing, you know. So if you're struggling or whatever, that's okay, you know, that's perfectly fine. If you're a teenager, if you're a high schooler, and if you're in college, if you're 40 years old, that's all right. That's part of it, you know. This is part of it. This is important, you know. This is perfectly fine. So, um, in this sort of part one of how to learn programming, what I'm trying to get across is, um, it's a struggle. It's a process. The way it's taught, it might not be perfect for you. If it is, great, then you probably might not even really need this video. You know, you can just move on. Um, but a lot of trial and error, a lot of failing, struggling. Failing is not a bad word. All right? Failure is not a bad word. In fact, it's necessary. It's necessary. Struggle is necessary. Um, so part one, how to learn programming, takes a while, maybe, you know. For me, practical practical need was the key thing of my learning, because the vague sort of philosophy, the background stuff, that lost me really fast. I needed to know why, I needed to know where I was going to use it, otherwise I struggled with it. And maybe that's why I'm not great at math, because when you give me a math formula, I'm like, well, what do I need it for? Oh, to calculate the angle. Well, when do I need that? When do I need to calculate the angle? When I was a teenager? Never, right? But now when I'm making a 3D space sim, there's times I need to calculate angles. Let me put it that way. So it's a bit funny. So anyway, guys, this is part one, how to learn programming. Hopefully this was helpful. Let me know if you have any questions, comments, feedback. This is a huge topic, so there's going to be a part two, part three, part four, um, part five. You know, maybe, hopefully. Thanks for watching. Um, I'll probably rewatch this video and be like, oh, I need to talk about this more and talk about that more. So stay tuned for that. If you know a friend that's interested in programming, kick this towards them. I'd appreciate any kind of help spreading the word. You know, with making my reach wider to a wider audience. Hope you enjoyed this video as much as I enjoyed making it, and I'll talk to you later.